All right. Welcome, everyone, to the next episode, the next session of CME Palooza Fall. This is in full color. Boy, we've come a long way since, I guess, the 1950s. So this session is called This Is Your Grant Life. This session is sponsored by Helio CME and Antidote Education Company. I am Scott Kober, one of the co-producers of CME Palooza Fall. This session is being moderated by Ted Singer. Ted is the president of PVI, Peerview Institute for Medical Education. So as with all of our CME Palooza sessions, we're going to start by thanking our sponsors. Our gold sponsors, Haymarket Medical Education, Med Learning Group, Platform Q Health Education. Our silver sponsors, Academic CME, Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, Antidote Education Company, Clinical Education Alliance, Daiichi Sankyo, DKB Med, Helio CME, Integrity Continuing Education, Medscape Education, Projects in Knowledge, and Talem Health. And our bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, AXDev, Bonum Continuing Education, Catalyst Medical Education, CMEology, Excalibur Medical Education, Global Education Group, Goodwin Group, Infograph Ed, Integritas Communications, Iridium Continuing Education, Leading Learning, MedIQ, Partners for Advancing Clinical Education, Paradigm Medical Communications, PriMed, QDCME, PVI, Research to Practice, Touch IME, Vindigo Medical Education, and Right Medicine. Phew, I'm exhausted. So there are two ways to ask questions during this and all of the CME Palooza Fall sessions. You can use the Horizon CME text line to send in a question. The number here is on your screen, 267-666-0CME. That's 0263. Or if you open up the viewing window in YouTube by clicking on the Watch on YouTube on your lower left-hand corner, you can enter in questions within the YouTube chat function, and we will get to as many questions during this session as we can, so please feel free to submit as much as often as you like. So we will be incorporating audience response questions during this session, as with all of our CME Palooza sessions, via the Poll Everywhere ARS system. If you don't already have it up on your phone, tablet, or other device, download the Poll Everywhere app and join the presentation entitled CME Palooza 005, or type in the URL that is showing there on your screen. We will start with one ARS question here in a moment, so you might want to get ready. So finally, please note that the opinions, discussions, and/or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, its parent company, or their affiliates. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Ted to introduce the panel and get us started.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Derek. You know, that impressive list of sponsors, I think, you know, before long, CME Palooza is going to be bought by private equity, like so much else in CME. But hey, let's start out with a little humor, right? Great to thank you everyone who's out watching. CME Palooza is such a fun day twice a year. And, you know, this theme of This Is Your Life, I credit Scott with coming up with that idea. And, you know, that little intro that we saw at the beginning was the old television show. And this show actually goes back to radio. So it's one of the original kind of concepts of a TV show, or an entertainment for the masses, a mass media entertainment. And the idea was that the show would find a person, and, you know, a person of interest, and later on it really became celebrity driven, where they would surprise them by having sort of people from their past who would influence their life in some key way. And they would bring them out one by one to, like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is your first grade teacher. This is your mentor from wherever. And, you know, the host, this guy, Ralph Edwards, had a very prominent photo album. So he would sort of be like, well, let's look at the beginning of your life and see what's happening, and use that as a way to tee up kind of the person coming in. And so in our case, you know, our sort of spin on that is to think about, think about our friend Mr. Grant request letter, grant our letter for short. And, rather than bring out people from Grant's past one by one, we've assembled a panel to talk about, sort of grant development and then activity development in the modern CME landscape. So we're hoping we're not going to just be doing a 101 sort of regurgitation of stuff that you guys already know. We're really going to try to think about, in today's marketplace, in today's environment, what are the challenges that we all face with developing grants? How has the bar been raised in developing grants and activities, and really try to keep it timely in that way? And so this expert panel, that I've recruited here, which I thank so much for being part of this, is great because each person has some real versatility in the different perspectives that they can represent. So when we were planning, we sort of thought about, well, we want to have providers, and I think that's Andrea, myself, and Jen are all working for providers, and I will introduce everybody in a second. We know that collaboration and partnership is important there, and we also know that the perspective of supporters as well as providers and instructional design expertise is something that's never been more important. And so with that, I want to introduce Andrea Harshman, who is the director of the Office of Professional Education at National Jewish Health out of Colorado. Coming to us from New York, Jen Baumberger, Senior Director of Educational Partnerships at Medscape, and recently relocated to the South just in time for Helene, which he survived and made it past. Brad Bednar is co-founder of the Caliber Institute for Quality Medical Education. And we also say hello to Brad's co-founder, Hillary Schmidt, who participated in the development of this presentation and is a great friend to all of us and many in the industry as well. We hope Hillary's doing great today. So, as far as the perspectives, I think that, Andrea not only is a provider, but also is often brought in as a partner in joint sponsorship. So she has those perspectives. And I think, Jen works as a provider in a specific partnership generation role. And Brad, who, Caliber are instructional design experts, but also work with a ton of providers and a ton of supporters. And so I think the fact that Brad has the perspective of a wide variety of supporters will let him bring that perspective to the conversation today. So with that being said, Scott, if we can tee up the first polling question, that would be great. And what we're talking about here, we know that most grants or a lot of grant requests start with a supporter issued RFP. So just, this is generally a question for providers, which I know is most of our audience. So an RFP comes out, you become aware of it. What percentage of RFPs that come across your desk do you respond to? We'll let the numbers get a little bit more crooked here. Okay, the votes are coming in. We got some interesting distribution here. As more people come in. Okay, so I think we're getting a general idea here. The largest number being 0 to 25%. So I think I think we're looking at, a lot of our audience here today then is not responding probably primarily to RFPs that are coming out of supporters, and then you've got, a healthy chunk at 50% and above, and then a smaller percentage who is saying they never respond. So I think I'll start it off, Andrea, looking to you. You can reflect on these results if you want, but also I would say as a provider, you get an RFP. What's that decision process like for you guys, whether or not you're going to respond?
Sure. So I mean, I actually think this is interesting, that it's kind of pretty varied. But when we're looking at an RFP that comes out, right? So my particular institution, we don't cover everything. So we're not providing education in all disease states. So right, that already narrows us down. But we look at, does it align with what we do at National Jewish Health, my academic medical center? Do I have a champion? Do I have somebody who that is their thing? So that kind of helps us decide. Bandwidth, does it make sense for us right now if we're working on other things to stop and pivot and go after a certain RFP? So those are kind of the first line questions, or that we talk about internally. Does this make sense? Is this a disease state that we feel like we can bring something to the table that's worthwhile? Do we have the bandwidth because we might be working on other things? So those are the main things I kind of look at initially, and then we kind of dig in a little bit more. But I don't know how deep we want to go with that first question. So
No, I think that's good. I think as a provider myself, and working at a provider who works in nearly every therapeutic area, I'd say, we're definitely in that top band of 75 to 100%, and I think, and part of it is, my company relies 100% on commercial support. And so I think that when you see an RFP and understand that there's funding available, right? Because what does an RFP say? But like, no, there's funding available. There's funding available here. It's very hard to pass up on that opportunity unless you're really completely unqualified to respond to it. And there are certainly RFPs that that you look at and you're like, no, this isn't for us. I mean, there are RFPs that go out that are strictly research-based RFPs, which is something that that as a provider we don't get involved with. But Brad, I'm interested in from the work that you've done with supporters, because I'm sure that you've talked with them about
Sure.
RFPs and how to design RFPs. Putting on their hat for a second, how have you seen RFPs evolve and the kinds of ways that they're structured,
Right.
and what they're asking for?
Well, what I see is very interesting is, first of all, there are more RFPs coming out. More supporters are really focusing in on it. One of the real critical drivers of this is they're looking to improve the quality of the grants that they get and make them more focused. Because if you look at the supporter side, their challenges, they get a huge number of grants in. They're challenged to review everything and identify it. So they want the type of grants that are more focused in on the therapeutic targets and the areas that they're interested in, the gaps. So they'll put out RFPs, and the RFPs themselves are getting more refined now. You're seeing more detail within a compliant nature, what they can request. They're asking for a lot more detail on that. And that, again, helps them then get the type of grants they're looking for. Another trend that's taking place is we're seeing RFPs for QI. And that fundamentally is different type of RFP. So what they're looking to do is, how do you structure that type of RFP? Because QI really is very much the future of CME, and supporters are looking at it very actively. So those two things are really taking place with the RFPs. It's a vehicle that works well for them. They like it for the most part, and I think you're going to see a lot more in the future.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with all that stuff. Jen, as someone who, a lot of RFPs now certainly say, encourage the collaboration with outside organizations. And as someone who's been in the partnership seat that you have for a long time now, how have you seen trends in the types of organizations that you're working with, and how an RFP might push you to in one direction or another when it comes to a type of partner that you'd look to bring in?
I think, like Brad said, they're getting a lot more compliantly specific. So they'll be really clear if they want like health equity or patient-centric focus, or NPs and PAs specifically, like APP provider or APP organizations. So when you're reading the RFP and analyzing whether you're going to respond or if you're going to respond, I think when you're working, and sometimes they even say like encourages collaboration or with other groups. And so that's when you'd reach out to another kind of group, depending on strategically how you interpret the RFP or what it very specifically says, and decide whether you want to potentially reach out to an advocacy group or a group that specializes in health equity, or an NP or PA specific organization, or even like Brad said, if it's QI and you're a provider like Ted and I, you might want to reach out to a university or a medical center so you can really dig in and potentially get that information and provide high quality outcomes.
Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, to add to what Jennifer said, she hit a real key here. And one of the things is, from a provider standpoint, is you have to analyze the partner that you're looking to reach out to. Do you want the cachet of a name, somebody big, or are you really looking for that expertise and that specialty?
Yeah.
And I see that has fundamentally changed in terms of the grants. The partnerships are, to Jen's point, and somebody, like Andrew's group, reaching out to a partner that can either, for example, if you're doing a QI, you may want a large hospital group that has a lot of data, has a lot of information, or has experience in doing QIs. And I see that shift dramatically. And that's been very, very positive. It's not just, I get in a letter from them of agreement.
Yeah.
And I'll add one other point. These letters need to be a lot more specific. They need to really spell out, okay, what is a partner responsible for? Not just I agreed to do it, but what are my responsibilities? What resources am I going to bring to it? That's very critical in defining it. And that's something that on the supporter side that they look at very closely at the partnership. What does that partner bring to the table?
Yeah, Andrea, I'm interested in your perspective on that as someone who is both a provider and a partner, who I know, based on sort of National Jewish's, impeccable reputation, especially in the pulmonary space. I'm sure anything that comes out with a pulmonary topic, someone wants to partner with you.
Right.
How have you seen, reflect on that as someone who's brought in, and what you think are best practices in someone trying to recruit you to join their effort?
So we do get approached, and the challenge is sometimes we might be competing for the same grant, right, or the same RFP. So depending on what that is, some companies are like, you can submit more than one, grant to the RFP, and if it's not similar to what we're doing and they have their own take, then I'm all for partnering if it's something we're doing together, because it's like, what, that's a great idea. We didn't have it. I'd love to partner with you. We also get folks where I think it is, well, we just want your name on it. And, I think there needs to be a discussion, as you all referenced, about who is doing what and why, so that's a conversation. We have to vet that, right? I represent National Jewish Health. I have to have our best interests at heart. And so I have to vet who we partner with. And as the provider, it reflects on us too. So, just being thoughtful about who you partner with is important. We also go to patient advocacy groups or other associations to partner with, where we'll approach them. So we have people coming to us, but we go out. So I think you have to make it mutually beneficial. And so I think that's, and then so the supporter understands, why are these two groups partnering other than to check a box? So I think that's a big thing.
So we've got a question. This kind of ties into what Andrea just said. So this came over the Horizon CME text line. So what are the panel's thoughts about providers who submit multiple grant proposals in response to a single RFP?
Brad, I'm sorry, Andrea, what'd you say?
I said we do that. We do sometimes submit more than one. Usually it's just one. But if it's, hey, we have two good ideas and they're different, and we want to throw them both out there for consideration, that's why we might do it, because they might the format might be different enough, right? So Brad, you clearly seem to have some thoughts.
Yeah, this is a warning label to everybody. Unfortunately, I've seen multiple grants come in. They are so similar. There is boilerplate, like the back ends, before we were talking about outcomes, same outcomes, same thing, with a minor difference and variation. I have heard from supporter after supporter, the reaction is, well, did they really think this through, or are they just throwing this out to see, what sticks against the wall, the spaghetti philosophy? Be careful. I think to your point, if it's different, then it makes sense. But unfortunately, we see too many that are really close. And what happens, they may both be good ideas, but they get discounted. You're already starting from a negative point of view with the reviewer.
So I'll say when I've done that, I've checked with the supporter. So we don't do that all. I mean, we do. So I'm not taking that back, but that's good to know, though, Brad. The thought on that.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott. Please.
Yeah,
Here he is. I was going to say to queue up the second polling question, but please, questions.
Here's another really good question that I like. This also came over the Horizon CME text line. Do RFPs actually help supporters focus responses? We're hearing they're getting 50 to 80 responses to a single RFP. Isn't this overwhelming?
That sounds pretty overwhelming. Brad, having talked to a lot of them, what do you say?
Yes and no. Yes, they do get, a lot of times they do the, oh my God, I just got in 50 grants I need to go through. But are they 50 good grants? Inevitably, the review process moves along fairly quickly. As a reviewer, you're going to eliminate a lot of them very quickly. They're off target. They're not, focused in exactly on what you want. Then you get down to that core 5 or 6 that are really good, and then you go through your in-depth review process. So, yes, there's people have voiced a concern about I'm getting too many grants in, but overall, I think it's a positive because you're getting better quality grants.
I got you. So, Scott, if we could queue up the second polling question, because I think we're going to move now from the realm of the RFP to the realm of the actual grant itself, which we've started to talk about. And this is for supporters, which I know is a smaller subset of the people watching, but just really, and this is, the way we phrased this was just sort of, what percentage of grants you receive meet your organization's minimum standards? And one of the reasons I wanted to ask this question was that there was a session at the recent AIS meeting in Philadelphia on needs assessments, and it was publicly shared from the stage that a lot of grants coming in all look the same, which is something Brad was just saying. And they aren't meeting kind of the minimum standards as the bar has been raised in the industry. And so I just thought it would be interesting get a little snapshot of those on the session today. And we can see that 75 to 100% has 0 responses. So that's telling us something right away. We'll see how we weight toward the bottom. But hey, I mean, 50 to 75%, 50% of you, and I know again, this we could be talking about an N of 10 here answering the survey, but that's okay. So directionally, we know that it's not the upper tier, and now more votes are coming in at the lower. Maybe some providers are sneaking in there and answering A just to try to make this look better. No, but this is interesting data. And I think that we can sort of move. I think I was going to tee up, Brad, for you to start talking about this, which is a little bit of a continuation of what you were saying before. But as you've, as someone who again talks to a lot of supporters, but in the not only talks but works with them, is helping train supporters on what to look for in a good grant and how to especially score things like instructional design and linkage between gap and learning objective. What are you hearing and what are you seeing with your own eyes as far as the quality of grants? And, so I think maybe 2 things. One, how has the bar been raised in how a grant request gets reviewed? And B, where are providers either consistently strong or need some work?
Okay. Well, to answer your first question, yes, the bar is being raised. And what we're seeing is that supporters are actually designing checklists for grants where they're actually looking at specific components of the grant. A lot, obviously, on our side, instructional design elements in there. For example, the learning objectives line up with the actual content? Are the outcomes actually analyzing each of the learning objectives? They're looking at that, and they're actually putting scores together with them. They score it. We've developed instructional design rating scales, and if you don't hit a minimum number, they don't even take it any further. So back to the earlier point of how do you cull through all the grants that are coming in there, they have certainly raised the bar. They are now very much focused on in our area, instructional design. There used to be, the industry was at one point was very focused only on outcomes, wanted that number. Well, the industry has now recognized the fact that the way you get good outcomes is having a good instructional design. You're not going to get the outcome number. So now there is a focus within the organization to look at those types of measures. So yes, it has increased. Yes, they're scrutinizing it. You're seeing, for example, I'm sure a lot of providers will agree with this, a lot more RMIs, a lot more information they're asking for in detail. Okay, you claim this. How does this tie in with actually achieving the learning objective or whatever the question may be? Because they need specifics to make that decision with it. They want more detail.
Yeah. And I think thinking about that bar being raised, Andrea, as a provider, how have you had to sort of meet that challenge, over the last, I don't know, let's say, I know. So Caliber, Brad, has been in existence for about 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel let's look at like the last decade, last 5. Well, I guess, do we count COVID or not? Is time a flat circle when it comes to COVID? Whatever. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10. Do we really know how much time has passed because of COVID? Anyway, how have you guys had to adjust, Andrea, to that?
I think it's being clear, to your point, Brad, what are we doing? How are we doing it? Why do we think that's going to work? So I've never gotten a question that detailed in an RFI or RMI. So my guess is if it wasn't clear, they would have just moved on. But, I think that's what I really look at when I'm working with my team. Like, is it clear what we're doing? Because sometimes I'm like, I know we have a good idea. We haven't, we'll really work at are we getting across what we're doing? So I would say we spend more energy doing that. I know you said we're still really focused on outcomes, right? So to your point, that's all connected with the instructional design. So that is something literally everyone in our department touches. And so we spend a lot of energy on that. And I think we could probably spend more. So for us, I think it's really just being focused on how we're communicating that. And it isn't just check that box, we're doing level 4 outcomes. I think we need to talk more about it.
Yeah.
In the proposal.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say as a provider, I think a lot of different things have had to happen. I mean, one interesting thing about the RFPs is that, which again, I sympathize with the supporters getting in this many grants. So the RFP is asking for more now, yet asking for less pages, right? Which I think is smart. It's really, forcing providers to rethink and edit themselves, as opposed to just like, oh, now they want an expanded section on this, I'll just add 3 more pages to it. So I do think page limits are a proper request. So I think we've had to look at our full grant request letter, look at it from top to bottom, work with outside groups that consult on that kind of thing. How are we doing? What are we doing well, and what are we not doing well? So in that way, maybe getting specialized training in some areas. And again, we know that all these things cost money. So it's I mean, obviously there's free stuff that you can find online all the time, but there still needs to be somebody organizing that and getting you focused around it, which can be tough to do in the busy day-to-day that we're all dealing with, right? I think, expanding outcomes expertise, I think, is important. And then, expanding your partnership footprint, I think, is important. And Jen, that sort of leads me, back to you. I'm just very curious, as what are I think that major medical societies are classic partners that
Yeah.
many that are providers, but many providers work with. I think health systems like Andrea's that also are providers are classic partners. Patient advocacy groups are kind of classic partners if we go back greater than 10 years. How have you seen what are some different types of organizations that you've been partnering with kind of as a result of the bar being raised in CME?
I think, obviously there's a lot of creativity that can go into deciding and choosing a partner. On the spot, I can't think of one other than the ones you mentioned, but I think in terms of when you look at these RFPs and when you're trying to read into them and decide like what will be beneficial to patients, what will be beneficial to learners, right? And how will you kind of measure those? It's important to think about and analyze like what organizations could get you those outcomes. So instead of just being like, for a gastro one, going with the major gastro society, like what can get you to where you want to be for the outcome that you're trying to provide. So really analyzing that in depth and then describing it very succinctly but detailed, like here's what we're going to do, here's why we're working with this particular organization, and here is the outcome we're expecting to get out of it. And we've found that to be a really successful way to go about it.
Yeah, let me ask you a better
Yeah.
question. I was like, Jen, name this, and then I named everything on the list. So
Yeah.
that was a bad question.
No. It wasn't a bad question.
Here's hopefully a better one. So an RFP comes out, and I think we'd all agree that I think RFP deadlines have gotten more
Yeah.
reasonable, especially when it comes to something like quality improvement, where
Right.
like I think having a couple of months to work on a grant of that type probably produces a better grant.
Yeah.
Although, I'm sure many of us still like writing your term paper when you're back in school. Wait a little too long to get started, but whatever.
Yeah.
We'll let that pass by for a second. Jen, when we're talking about so you've got partner that they want or that you want to add to a grant, you've got a deadline, and sometimes what's the process for you about sort of cultivating relationships when there isn't a deadline, so that maybe you can call upon that when a deadline comes up? Because I do think that there's this speed dating aspect to partnering that can be very unsatisfying for the partner, right? Like, hey, you don't know me, but can you work with us on this grant? And maybe it'll get funded and maybe it won't. And can we get to know each other real quick? So just, since this is your day-to-day life, I'm just interested in how you kind of ride that wave of relationship developing when sometimes there's opportunity, sometimes there's not. And what are some best practices with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's challenging and there's a limited number of people within an organization. So you can't cultivate every relationship and then be able to like maintain that throughout the years, right? Because not everything is always going to come your way. Or I think what I've found as a best practice is just being really direct and forward and letting anyone you're working with know the deadline, know what the RFP is, know why you'd want to work with them. And, I know we don't like this, but discussing budgets and discussing what's in it for them, right? Like, why do we want to work with you and why should you work with us? And then just like in any other, role in the organization, if it's beneficial and something works out, great. And if it's not, just using that as a touch point to maintain the relationship. Hey, I get it. This is too tight of a turnaround. Maybe this one's not going to work out, but could we continue discussions for potential future ones that come along? And here's the process for CME, because some of these organizations have never participated in CME and don't know what it is. And
Yeah.
so you're going to explain that. And then if they don't want to jump on board when they don't know you and your turnaround is like 7 days, then you kind of go into, well, yeah, let's discuss this for future ones. And that way, if something else comes up, like this might be really beneficial for you to participate in.
Yeah. Ted, back to your point about what do you put into a grant, making it as succinct as possible. I think an interesting perspective that providers should think about is the challenges that the IME person has within the supporters organization. Part of that is not only evaluating the grant, but then the process is they're going to go to the grant committee. They're going to present that grant to the grant committee. So think about it from the standpoint of their needs. If you can put into the grant succinct chunks of information that they can then present. Remember, the medical directors, they don't have a background in IME. So they need to understand why this grant is valuable, why the instructional design is being chosen. And if you can put those chunks into the grant, you're helping the IME reviewer. You're helping them out a lot and everything. And that becomes very, very valuable. I often have seen that, help me out here. We do that as part of our training, help them out. How do you present a grant that you think is really a winner to individuals that may not have that expertise? May say, oh, I want to work with Andrea's group because I know if it's going to be in COPD, I've got to work with her.
Yeah.
Or I have a favorite doctor, or a favorite provider. So that's something, if you can keep that perspective, is very helpful as well too.
Scott.
Yeah, so we've got a couple comments/questions that have come in. So I'm going to read this first one. This came over the Horizon CME text line. All right. Unfortunately, from a supporter perspective, it seems like we see very little improvement in submissions, with needs assessments being the worst culprit in terms of being nearly identical across applications. Quote, the field of XYZ is constantly changing and clinicians need to be updated, end quote, followed by a lit search. I suspect there are barriers to implementing better practices because leadership's perception may be that they gave us money before, so why should we change? As someone who has led numerous workshops on this subject for the past few years, it can be disheartening. All right, so that is a supporter perspective. Here is a question that came in. All right, so this is something that you guys can respond to. Do you think about if you are going, when thinking about responding to an RFP, do you think about if you are going to be able to get multiple supporters, or do you do that only if you win the grant from the RFP and need more funding?
All right. Well, Andrea, you were ready to comment on the first one.
It was just in our discussion about partnerships and then Scott bringing up needs assessment. I actually think that's where partners can really help with the needs assessment, from the standpoint of they have info or data perspectives you don't have. And so I have found that to be helpful, right? We still include a lit review, but we include interviews with our faculty, who are disease state experts. And then if it's a patient group, what are the insights you have from your membership or whatever that is, so I really feel like partnerships are a way we can kind of buff up our needs assessments. So that was my one comment. The other one, what was the last question? Oh, about multi-support.
Multi-support with an RFP, right?
Right.
So basically, yeah, the question is, do you submit multiple grants up front along with the RFP, or do you wait to see if you get funding before you submit the grant to other potential supporters?
Oh.
For us, we'd make that decision at the beginning. I don't think we would wait for funding. And then, I don't know. I know we have change of scope on here as one of our topics, so maybe that can roll into that. But.
No, Andrea, I think that's very good instinct, because I was going to say that. So Scott, we'll get ready to queue up poll question 3. But Brad, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to the first general supporter comment about the needs assessments being identical.
Well, we've looked at thousands of grants, and I have to say that there are some excellent needs assessments that are out there, and a lot of them are good. But there's a whole group of them that are sort of like this big pot where you throw everything in. Everything is in there in the needs assessment, and we've seen things such as confusion between what is a practice gap and a patient gap and a root cause, and it's not clear. And I've literally read grants where the needs assessment, I've come away more confused than clarified, and I've went to the end to try to sort it and figure it out as well too. And I think that's just a nature. One thing, a challenge of the beast. The needs assessments, again, everything is derived from what do you want to do differently at the point of care? What are you driving towards? You have to first identify what are the root causes. And again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit to some areas we're going to talk. But if you're not clear on what the barriers are, how are you going to develop an education with it? And in terms of the needs assessments, I've always felt, less is better, and that's a challenge. To write things succinctly is very challenging. If you want to put a lot of backup information, put it in the appendix. Again, everybody's concerned that my grant is going to get knocked out if they think I don't have a real understanding of the content and I don't put every clinical study in there. Well, you don't have to cite every clinical study in the needs assessment. You can reference it in the back. Again, making it succinct, making it clear, showing exactly that when I read this needs assessment, I've now identified what the problem is.
Yeah. And so, I would say the other thing I would add from our perspective as a provider, it's all about kind of education of your own staff, right? So if we think about the classic truism that gets trotted out in our business all the time, that it takes 17 years for new science to enter practice in a significant way. Well, it's the same thing when you're trying to teach writers who've been developing and staff that has been developing grants for years to do something differently, right? And so, we've had training on proper, needs assessments, the linkage of, the identification of gap tied to root cause, and how to find evidence for that, how to state it, how to outline it in a document, how to make sure that the learning objective supports that, right? And so we train on that, but just like we learn from instructional design, where anyone to learn anything, someone needs to have it demonstrated, and then they get it to practice it, and then they get feedback on it. The same thing happens with your staff, right? So you've trained them on it, and then you're looking at their grants and you're trying to provide them feedback, and they get iteratively better over time. So I think that I sympathize with supporters seeing poor needs assessments. And I'd say that I think most of us are out there working on it. Well, I think a lot of us are out there working on it hard to try to improve and to try to get consistency across the organization, across therapeutic areas with different staff, factor in staff turnover. And I think that, especially in the last few years, COVID was a real catalyst for people leaving one organization to go to another organization. It was like a big snow globe, and it shook up, and a lot of people left, and you have new staff that you have to train. And so I just think that the reality of trying to get those new higher standards across everyone in your group is a heavy lift, but we work hard at it. Jen, please.
I think one of the other, and this doesn't necessarily have to do with partnerships, but I think one of the other challenges in terms of what you all are talking about, and then to respond to that comment, is because we don't have like a lot of visibility into what they think about our grants, or what they think about, supporters think about our needs assessments. It's not that we're being lazy and just continuing to do, lit reviews because it was funded before. It's that if we don't do that lit review, is it going to be, because it won before, is it going to be judged harshly? And that's why I like Brad's idea about potentially putting that stuff in the appendix and putting, the succinct other stuff that Andrea was recommending, like stuff from the partners or quotes or whatever, up front or in your needs assessment, but then you can keep that lit review or something else in an appendix, because we don't know, like, if we take out the lit review, is that gonna kick us out of the running, right?
Sure. Yeah.
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 I mean, Brad, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, well, one other quick point that I will add, since we're running tight on time here, is the fact that, and I think you touched on this, Ted, is that staffing of who writes these grants. We have seen grants come in that are clearly very siloed. When I say siloed, you have the outcomes person does one section, the other person does the other, and there's not a lot of cooperation between it. I'll give you a quick example. We were in a training program for a provider, and we were explaining the fact that the outcomes people have to be involved with the design up front. The woman sitting next to me was the director of outcomes. She jumps up and screams, scared the hell out of me. She said, "I've been telling you people for 5 years, this is what the problem here. Listen to the man, please." You know, that siloing effect, we do see it in grants, where it seems like totally different people are writing different things, and it's disjointed. So, you know, again, you need to have that as well, too. That involvement of the key people at all stages of it. Not just if you have the business folks up front writing and then all of a sudden handing it off to somebody else, you know, it causes problems.
And
That's very dramatic. I'm sorry, Jen, please.
No, and I think same can be said for partnerships. So, you know, best practice, instead of an afterthought, like when you're strategizing the grant and the RFP, like you want to think about that at that time so you can incorporate it appropriately, just like outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely.
A plug for my team.
I think for a future CME Palooza, we need to do some recreations of the most dramatic moments in CME, and we can include the jumping up and yell thing.
Yeah. Wait a minute, Ted. I had a full head of hair when I started this business.
Listen, that's what hair and makeup's for. You know? Of course, I think some of those moments probably happen in the Alliance meeting hotel bar at midnight. But hey, we could recreate those too.
Sure.
So Scott, if we could, I know we're running short. If we could queue up the last and Don Harding, I saw your question. I'm going to answer it in a second. Yeah, so here, oh, great, we've got results already. So what percentage of projects that you either fund or plan require a change of scope prior to launch? And this is good. Like, this is, I think, most of it is lower, and it's not as perhaps as pervasive a problem as although, you know, 25 to 70, you know, then the votes are coming in. We'll let this keep churning as I keep talking. Don Harding had asked the question, how do we decide whether or not to outsource part of the writing of a grant in response to an RFP? Personally, Don, I would say, you know, we've got, you know, so there's two considerations here. Number one, do you have the expertise in-house to properly write that grant? So I would think that would be one of the first things, you know, is there, you know, especially if it's something sort of more niche, you know, is it an audience that you don't know as well, or, you know, or something like that? And I think the second question becomes, you know, that's usually a cost, right? That you're going to pay a freelancer to do something versus having someone who's already on staff doing it. So I think it's an expertise question and a financial question. Andrea, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
So, I mean, I guess I don't look at it as I've outsourced somebody writing the grant. I might outsource somebody writing the lit review that is guided by discussions we've had with faculty first and review. And we will go kind of back and forth with, you know, a medical writer who's worked on a lit review. But so I don't feel like that's outsourcing somebody writing our grant. I don't see it that way, but it's a part of it. And otherwise it's people in our team who are putting the grant and writing the majority of the grant. I guess it depends on if you think the lit review is the majority of the grant, but.
Yeah, no, I agree. So in looking at these poll results, I think, you know, there was, just going back to the question that Scott had asked from someone before, which was, do you tying into the kind of the multi-support question, do you pursue multi-support? And I think that, listen, I think that there are therapeutic areas where multi-support is much more prevalent than others, right? Oncology, hematology specifically, there is a large history of multi-support there. And I think that you're probably more likely to have multi-supported grants in that massive therapeutic world than you are in other places. I will personally say that as a provider, it's we work within the standards of integrity and independence, and so we're not worried about a single support being a bias issue, number one, because we're going to produce fair and balanced education. And so the more providers you have, potentially, the more complicated the execution of all aspects of the project are, whether it's the paper, the LOAs and the paperwork, whether it's the level of funding. And I think this tied in well, the change of scope, because if you do have to go down the change of scope route, suddenly you're doing more than one change of scope. And that introduces risk. One approves it, one doesn't. What happens then? And so I do think that for most providers, because we do hand on heart feel that we produce unbiased education, that single support is just easier to manage. That's what I would say there. Okay, you guys. So in the last couple minutes, so we were going to, moving to project implementation, which we're definitely going to have to give a little bit of short shrift. I think I'll just throw out a couple of interesting questions and see what you think. Andrea, as we've gotten sort of more, as we've asked to do more sort of dynamic educational designs, yet a lot of times we're dealing with faculty who are used to just doing they have their off-the-shelf slides that they just want to go up and present and then get off the stage. How have you been evolving with that and trying to manage that? So you're doing something a little more innovative, but still possibly working with these experts who are used to doing things in an older way.
Right. So some folks you're probably not going to change, but I think finding the faculty who are open to it, and then it's really like working and guiding them, right? Like this is supposed to be how we can help them be better, or not better, but educate differently. And so I just think it's them putting a little trust in you and you helping, guide, train, mentor them around it. I do think a lot of faculty are open to it because they know, they're on the other end of receiving it if they're going to like a big society meeting or things like that. Although this is something I find interesting when you're like talking to the experts and you're like, well, what do you like in your CME? And they're like, well, I don't do CME. And I'm like, really? Because you were just at the Big Chest or ATS annual meeting and you went to all those sessions, that's CME. So anyway, even our docs don't necessarily, or our presenters really understand that. But yeah, I think it's just working with them and them being open to it. And I find most people are, you have some people that are stubborn, but we're all kind of learning together is kind of how I feel about that some of the time. So
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I think there's you're always walking a little bit of a tightrope when you want to try something new. So I think if you go into that with your eyes wide open a little bit, it's big risk, big reward, big risk, possible crash and burn. And so, finding because the other thing is there's also a desire to expand the faculty pool, right? Yeah. And so one thing about faculty that do a lot of CME is they get it, like they're polished. It's like people who appear on news programs all the time. They get it. The light turns on, they hit their marks, and it's great. Trying out someone new often who isn't as polished, or trying something new with someone who's used to doing something a different way. You do risk the disaster of someone getting flustered on stage. And then, because I do think that more dynamic designs often involve more polling, more interaction with the audience. Sure. And when a faculty member starts getting flustered, right, the first thing that might start coming out of their mouth is another polling question. Okay, let's go, there's another one here. And all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I thought we talked about that before. But, so I think that's that I think is a risk that you take when you try to do something new. But you know, if you don't take chances, you don't have cool advances. And I do think that most supporters are pretty understanding about that.
Yeah.
To an extent.
To Andrea's point, one of the perspectives you want to take when you're approaching that expert with that old dusty slide, as she put it, and everything, take it from the point of view of you can never challenge them on their expertise. They are the experts, contact experts. If you take it from the standpoint of this is a way we can help you make your point of view more effective. It's something new. It's something different and everything. And let me give you examples. If you give concrete examples, you'll see it shifts from a confrontational conversation to, oh, okay, how can I incorporate my information in there? In fact, we actually do training program along those lines with that. And again, the point of view is very critical. And you need a skill set. You know, that's dealing with people and convincing people, and you need to be able to do that. But it is possible. Even the old crusty ones can be moved.
All right. So I know that this panel never gets rattled and is always a polished group, but we are at a time. So thank you guys. So for folks who are watching either the live version or the recorded version of this, there is a short survey at the bottom of the live tab. And we really do use this to kind of help plan future sessions. So if you have ideas, topics you want to hear more about, please go in that survey and fill it out. It'll take you about 2 minutes to complete it. And finally, to view the next session, no need to refresh the browser. Just look on our live page and click on the appropriate session link. The next session will start here in about 3 minutes. So with that, I'd like to thank Ted and Andrea and Jen and Brad for joining us, and for everybody watching. Thank you. And we will see everyone momentarily.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.